Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the conversations. I'm Somna Sambo. Now, early in his term, President Joe Biden told the country that he had been elected to solve problems. As he marks the anniversary of his inauguration this week, there are growing doubts over whether he can fulfill his theory of his own presidency. There's a sharper focus on his foreign policy objectives, especially with Russia and China. Biden told a news conference that Putin will pay a serious and dear price, in quote, for invading Ukraine, but indicated a minor incursion might be treated differently. The White House has stressed that any Russian military move will be met with a swift, severe response from the West. Biden also defended his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Let's listen to him.
I think he still does not want any full-blown war, number one. Number two, do I think he'll test the West, test the United States and NATO as significantly as he can? Yes, I think he will. But I think he'll pay a serious and dear price for it that he doesn't think now will cost him what it's going to cost him. And I think he'll regret having done it. Putin has a stark choice. Either de-escalation or diplomacy, confrontation of the consequences. And what I'm concerned about is this could get out of hand, very easily get out of hand because of what you said, the borders of Ukraine and what Russia may or may not do. I am hoping that Vladimir Putin understands that he is short of a full-blown nuclear war. He's not in a very good position to dominate the world. There is no way to get out of Afghanistan after 20 years easily. Not possible, no matter when you did it. And I make no apologies for what I did. I have a great concern for the women and men who were blown up on the line at the airport by a terrorist attack against them.
And for more on Biden foreign policy 1 year into his presidency, I have in the studio with me Ambassador Joe Keshi, a diplomat who has served in several countries, including Togo, Ethiopia, Belgium, and the US. And from our London studio, by Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic. Let me start with you, Ambassador. Let's talk about this withdrawal of the troops from Afghanistan. A lot of Americans had anticipated that that was the right way to go. Even Trump had said so, and a lot of Americans were behind him. But here we had Biden withdrawing these troops and being called sloppy at the end of it. What do you make of that? Isn't it confusing?
No, I think it was the way and manner the withdrawal was executed at the end of the day. I share the president's view that it was the right thing to do, and most Americans agree that the war had gone on for too long with no possibility of victory. And the second thing, again, I agree with the president, is that, look, no matter when and how you decide to withdraw, there's no way it was not going to be messy, given the circumstances on the ground at that particular time. Perhaps they could have done better than they did. But the truth of the matter is that one way or the other, it could have also been very messy.
All right, and I'll come to you, Karl. President Biden has said that he's got no apologies for the mode of his withdrawal of the U.S. troops. What do you make of that?
Sumner, good afternoon, or good evening, that is. You need to put this in a larger context, where we are at the end of the first year of his presidency. Right now, the polling numbers show that approval for the handling of his presidency so far now is at the lowest point in his first year. It's at about 40%, only 41% or so approve of how he's doing his job, about 56% disapprove. That's the lowest so far of his term. The only president who's been lower at this stage, after the first year, is Donald Trump, and where after the first year, where Biden was about 10 points higher than that. And the reasons for that have to deal with a lot of things, quite frankly, that are outside of his control. For example, the handling of the coronavirus, the pandemic. They thought that he would have that under control. However, we saw what happened with the Delta variant, and now the Omicron variant now surging. and the response or late response to handling that. And when it comes to Afghanistan, here they saw a president who was supposed to be very competent when it came to foreign policy and knew what to do, and in fact was just simply just the opposite. What he did say, however, he said he had nothing to apologize for. What he meant that was that, when you try to evacuate after 20 years, that's always going to be a messy thing. What he regretted mostly was really the loss of life. So then finally, for Americans, what's uppermost in their mind really is what's happening with the economy, and that's inflation. You've got inflation now approaching nearly 6%, Sumner. So in the mix of all of that, he's looking at a situation where he's at his lowest approval ratings. And what's also important to keep in mind is this, Sumner. Historically speaking, when you're a newly elected president, that first midterm election, which is now coming up in 22, that's when you lose a lot of seats in the House. And right now, the Democrats, even though they have control over both the Senate and the House, he's at risk of losing the House. He only has like a 6 or 7 margin there in the House, Sumner, and on average, that incoming sitting president loses more than 30 seats in the House at the midterms. So it's against the backdrop of all of that, how Americans are, reacting to the coronavirus, the handling of that with the new variants, the lack of competence in Afghanistan, and then finally inflation fears as seen by the economy. So that's really the overall picture we're seeing right now.
And Karl, one would want to wonder what sort of bipartisan support he's got from Congress, considering the backlash from the Republicans. And Biden was almost angry while referring to the Republicans. I mean, he used these harsh words that name one thing that they're actually for. And it felt like it was disheartening for him that the Republicans just won't support much of his policies, and they just keep using this Afghan issue to hit him hard.
You're absolutely right, Sumner, because here you are talking about someone who served in the Senate for 36 years. And here's someone who thought that he knows how to do deals. He knows how to reach across the aisle. In fact, he was almost bragging before taking office or during the campaign that there would be an epiphany when he took office, because that epiphany would show that he knew how to make common ground with Republicans. However, he now admits that he was somewhat maybe naive in the sense that as during the Obama years, as far as Republicans are concerned, the last thing they want to do is make a Democratic president, the sitting Democratic president, look good. And he said he never thought there'd be so much obstructionism right now that he's seeing right now in Congress, especially also from the minority leader Mitch McConnell, where their only aim is to make sure he doesn't do a good job and doesn't get credit for anything. And so even though you saw this bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, which meant infrastructure and millions of dollars being distributed across the country, including Mitch McConnell's home state of Kentucky, where roads, bridges, and highways would be built, even in Republican strongholds, that didn't mean they would cooperate in terms of other legislative aims, such as another spending bill, the Build Back Better plan, or for that matter, the voting rights bill. So that's where he feels stymied. So what we saw somewhere was this. Was Joe Biden yesterday, were we going to see a Joe Biden who was a bipartisan, unifier Joe Biden, or one playing back to the base? And what he said instead was this, something he's saying, well, you know something, I'm coming at you now. So it's as though he's thrown down the gauntlet. He's given up on trying to reach across the aisle to Republicans, because he realizes that, as in his words or mine, they have no agenda. The only agenda is to make sure he doesn't succeed.
To hold on there, Karl, while I come back to Ambassador here. I mean, Joe Biden kept referring to Mitch McConnell as someone who just wants to be a stumbling block. And while talking in the third person, he kept saying that Mitch McConnell is one who doesn't want to see Joe Biden having any success. How has the lack of cooperation from the Republicans affected the U.S. foreign policy under Joe Biden?
I think we need to put this in perspective. Joe Biden inherited a country far, far different from possibly the country that he served in when he was a U.S. Senator. Joe Biden came to office a very experienced man, having spent over 2-3 decades in the House, the Congress, in the Senate. He served as 8 years as president of as vice president of the United States before he became president himself. So I just think that he inherited a country completely different, and a Republican Party that is also far, far, far different from the from the kind of Republican party that worked, in unison with the Democrats in the days gone by. You can imagine if Watergate had happened now, what would be going on?
Yeah, I mean, because the Republicans kept saying that they had won that election despite the figures. I mean,
the Republican Senate leader did say first time around that they were going to make Obama's term, Obama a one-term president. This was even before the gentleman took office. It just shows you the new mindset, and things became complicated or even got worse under Donald Trump, that completely created and divided America to the extent that even on the issue of COVID, and we must understand is that sometimes I sit down and reflect, what else do people, when I hear people talk, he didn't do this, he didn't do this. This is a president that came on board from day one, trying to get everybody vaccinated, was begging people to get vaccinated. And yet, there were those, particularly, a number of, right-wing, news outlets that were campaigning against people taking the vaccination. And that created that dichotomy that has now, led to the situation that we have
okay, just before I bring in Karl, we'll just have to go on a short break and then continue the conversation. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, and I still have with me in the studio Ambassador Joe Keshi, who has been with me here talking about Biden's first year in office, and I also have our special correspondent Karl Bostic. And I want you, Karl, to actually take a look at what these issues are concerning U.S. foreign policy, especially as it relates to Africa. We had Anthony Blinken visiting Africa, 3 countries in sub-Saharan Africa: Nigeria, Senegal, Kenya. What did that actually mean for a Biden presidency? How do you think the reception has been like for the new U.S. policy on Africa under Biden administration?
Well, it was announced during Secretary of State Blinken's visit that there would be a summit with the White House and African leaders sometime this year. It's still unclear what the timetable for that would be like. I thought what was interesting was that there's a lot of talk about the so-called rivalry economically between, let's say, China and the U.S. And the U.S. was simply saying putting down its marker that when it comes to having a partnership, ours is one where we want to give economic aid and give support with no strings attached. Basically referring to the fact that when you do a deal or trade deals with China, you can expect to have a lot of conditions attached to that. But that doesn't change the fact that when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, China is the biggest trading partner for 32 countries. That's one reality, but another set of facts is that many of those countries have high indebtedness, where a lot of their servicing of that debt actually eats up a lot of their budget. So that's the kind of issue that maybe the U.S. can make some headway in terms of how to support debt relief, shall we say, in that respect. Then, of course, there's also the concern about the fact that you've got really fragile democracies going on. I believe last year alone, you had 4 coups against democratically elected governments. That's the biggest number of coups in almost 40 years, ranging from Mali, Guinea-Bissau, and Chad, for example. So the one question becomes, just how fragile are democracies in Africa, and what kind of support should the U.S. be giving, to those countries? Then, for that matter, you also have Russia, getting involved as well in terms of the support it gives to countries. A lot of it through its, you could say, mercenary arms, the Wagner Group, where you see them on the ground and getting involved with the Libyan conflict and now Mali. So I think it's important right now to consider the fact that while the U.S. is saying that they want to be the standard bearer in terms of being a neutral partner, I believe it was one of the Nigerian foreign minister was saying that in response to all this, at the end of the day, Nigeria wants the best deal. So, for example, if the best deal comes from China, that's just the reality that the U.S. has to accept or else put forward another counter offer.
Let's have your view on the U.S. Fresh approach to Nigeria, Sub-Saharan Africa, and since Blinken's visit in November, do you think anything has changed?
No, I'm not sure anything has changed, you know, but for me, it was those bans. Yeah. They lifted bans here and there. It was relatively a good start in the sense that, number one, when Hillary Clinton came to Africa under Obama, she actually came to lecture us on corruption. When the other gentleman who lost his job while he was in Nigeria came, he came to talk about the dangers of taking Chinese loans. And I remember at that time saying that if the Americans are angry or upset that we are getting loans from Chinese, let them put some couple of billions of dollars so that we can borrow from them as well, because we need some of these loans for the development of this country and the continent. But by and large, we have not really seen any concrete initiative about trying to engage, Africa and particularly Nigeria, the way one would have,
Yeah, how about the Prosper Africa policy of the Trump administration?
Wait. Again, it just shows you, as I always argue, that Africa is just at the periphery of world conversation. Because the whole thing that it's happening, we even to get vaccine, how are we getting it? We are getting vaccines that expire 2 or 3 weeks, after they arrive in this country. So we ourselves need to do a couple of things to make ourselves relevant within the affairs or within the Committee of Nations, and not think that the United States or anybody else has to be the one to provide the initiative or the leadership. No, it should be an engagement, but we must come to that engagement from the position of strength or some strength, and not from a position of weakness. Okay,
and I come to you, Karl, just very quickly before going to the issue of Ukraine. Do you think that the Prosper Africa policy of Trump, which was carried over by Biden, could still work in Africa?
Well, again, I think echoing what the ambassador was just talking about, I think a first indicator of a change in policy and a real genuine commitment is just really giving more support to the vaccination process in African countries. While the rest of the world, especially Western countries, have more than 60% in Western Europe, it's almost 70% of full vaccination. In the U.S., it's 75%. You've got the target goal of 20%, not even close to being met in Africa and in Nigeria. I believe it's maybe no more than 5%. There's a real shortfall of vaccines. So, for example, one step that could help change that is a willingness to share the licensing of these vaccines, so that vaccines can actually be manufactured locally in Africa, as opposed to vaccines arriving with only weeks left before they expire. Steps like that, for example.
Very interesting. And I will just go straight to the issue of Ukraine, the conflict, potential conflict in Ukraine that may come up. Do you foresee the Biden administration actually going to war with Russia over Ukraine?
The important thing is this, Sumner. They're still talking, even though last week's talks was considered to be a dead end, and there's a lot of pessimism right now. And then President Biden gave very mixed signals yesterday, saying that, well, there's an incursion, but it depends on what kind of incursion. That's when we know what kind of response to expect. That set off alarm bells in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, because what does some kind of incursion mean? In other words, if there are no casualties, but they're still crossing the border, isn't that an invasion? What constitutes an invasion? And Sumner, it's not only about just a U.S. response, it's a U.S.-European response. And then when you do give aid to Ukraine, what kind of aid are you giving to them? Right now, it's defensive weapons, anti-tank missiles. The U.S. has increased another $200 million of anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. Britain just sent some. We've got Blinken in Berlin meeting with his German counterpart, Annabella Baerbock, because Germany has been really kind of very non-committal about supplying any sorts of armed equipment or weapons or even defensive to any country because of its history during the Second World War. Yet Germany is a big player there. So Europe is divided on how to respond to Ukraine about whether they would not only increase weapons to Ukraine, but even maybe increase combat troops to countries bordering Russia, for example, in Poland and Romania. So tomorrow we'll have meetings with Blinken and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister in Geneva, the big question is this. It all comes down to Vladimir Putin, because they want written guarantees that are legally binding that NATO will not enlarge, will not deploy troops in countries like Ukraine, that Ukraine will never be allowed to join. Those are red lines the U.S. cannot guarantee. But right now, as Blinken said the other day, really it's just a matter of hours. Russia could invade Ukraine in a matter of hours. Or is this Putin's bluff?
Just hold on there. I'll just have to ask Ambassador this question. Do you foresee the U.S. joining forces with Europe to actually invade Ukraine?
You mean the Russians invading
to actually go to war with Russia over Ukraine?
I don't know. I've always felt that Putin is not such a stupid character that is just going to, you know. I think that what Biden said last night was probably the line Putin is acting on. He's testing the waters. He's testing the United States and strengthening trying to divide.
Do you think Putin sees Biden as a weak U.S. president? That's why he's doing that.
No, you asked your previous speakers about this. No, it's not a question of whether it's not the president who is weak. It's just that you just don't get up because you have all the armaments in the world and go to war. You must have a very vital interest that could lead you to that, to that war. But I just think that Putin wants to push his own game plans by ensuring that Ukraine does not get into, does not become a member of NATO. I think if he gets it, look, he's not a stupid man, and I don't see him just going to plunge Russia into a war, knowing fully well that the people of Ukraine will defend themselves, and that some of the defensive weapons that they are giving to them would at least kill some Russians.
All right. We must thank you so much, Ambassador Joe Keshi, for joining us on the show. And we also have to thank Arise Special Correspondent Karl Bostic for joining us. Well, that's how it's been for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Goodbye and thank you for watching. I'm Somna Sambo.